Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Monday, November 11th, 2024. I've been doing a countdown of my favorite video games of all time through each day of the year, and coming in at number 51 is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I'm a big fan of the newest entry to the Pokemon franchise. Despite this, I have not yet bought the DLC, and I plan to definitely take care of that next year. It's important I explain that because I've heard very good things about the DLC, and this ranking is based entirely on the base game. Also, as I have with every mainline Pokemon title, I've made a separate video ranking the new Pokemon introduced in this game, and oh man, do I have some thoughts this time around. That video is linked in the description, and of course also can be found just on my channel if you look. Scarlet and Violet are set in the Paldea region, which is roughly based on the Iberian Peninsula, and you feel that in large parts of the geography, architecture, and other parts of the culture. Life is largely focused on the arts, with music, sculpting, painting, dance, and food. So much food. From just a world design perspective, Paldea is one of my favorite locations in the franchise. Important to the world, however, is the enormous crater in the center of the region. It's massive, it's gigantic, really. It's filled with cool stuff you'll eventually get to check out. But pushed right up against this crater is a huge school. You are a new student that just moved to the region and are ready to start your first day of class when you get a visit from an old man that turns out to be the director of the academy named Clavel to go over some paperwork with your mom. But he's also there because as a welcome present to the academy, you get a Pokemon from him. All of the starters in this game are really good. I really like them. You'll see that if you watch the ranking video, but dang, it's a good one. I really like how you do get to run around with them and get some little video clips of them being super cute before you make your decision. Where are you running to, though? Your new next door neighbor, Nimona, who is obsessed with battling. She's one of your classmates and actually president of the student council, but also a champion rank trainer even at her young age. Between her and Clavel, you learn the ropes and start heading towards the school in the nearby city. Along the way, you get to check out some of the new Pokemon, and a fun feature of just getting to let one of your Pokemon out of the ball to fight stuff on its own as you run around, gaining a little passive experience as it does. I really like this feature. It's just a small thing you can do, but it's ultimately not that impactful, and definitely not the fastest way to just level stuff. Of note, the Pokemon Centers are all outdoors this time around, and I actually kinda like that. There's a design reason for this regarding the multiplayer, and yes, there's multiplayer that I'll complain about later, but I just really think it adds to the open world aspect of the game, keeping you out in the wilderness. More importantly on this path, however, is that along the way, you hear a Pokemon cry out. You and Nimona go to check it out, and you fall off a cliff. Thankfully, you're saved by your Rotom phone, but you're still stuck down there. You find a mysterious Pokemon you've never seen before. This is the cover Pokemon, of course, and it'll change based on whether you're playing Scarlet or Violet. It seems to be in pain, but perks right up when it notices you have a sandwich and gobbles the whole thing down. From there, it guides you through a dangerous cave, protecting you from harm, and gets you to safety, and then transforms into a different mode from exhaustion from all the battling. And presumably it was hurt before this. It's after this, however, you meet Arven. Arven is the best character in this game. Arven may be the best character in any Pokemon game. My first impression of Arven was that he was a pretentious jerk that I wanted to punch in his stupid face. You find out that the cover Pokemon apparently belongs to Arven, but he just straight up gives it to you because he's tired of looking after it, and the thing likes you. Because sandwiches. Once you reach the academy, you see that, like any school, there's bullies. You spot a young girl named Penny being berated by some colorful characters that belong to Team Star. This is the antagonist team for Generation 9, and I really like Team Star. After you clean that up and help her out, you can actually start school. At the school, you can, if you want, it's totally optional, go to class. Even though it is optional, I did every class in my first playthrough and was quite surprised that they were pretty fun. The professors are a great cast of characters who provide you with a bunch of side quests and prompt you to explore the world in some super fun ways. I especially like Professor Saguaro, who is the cooking teacher essentially, but he's this really big buff dude, and he thinks that he needs to keep up a cool and strong personality, but he actually secretly has a massive sweet tooth, and he's afraid for people to find out because they might not think he's strong and manly because he eats candy. So you get to help him with that and like smuggle him some sweet stuff. There's a lot of just fun stuff. A lot of the things you learn are things I already knew about Pokemon, but I did actually learn some new stuff, like the history class that teaches you the lore of the region, but I especially gained a better understanding for how terrestrialization works. This is a thing this is really the gimmick for this game. You can, once per battle, turn one of your Pokemon into a crystallized version of itself. This doesn't by itself give it a power boost or anything like Mega Evolutions or Dynamaxing did, but it does have a lot of benefits. When you terrestrialize, you'll change your Pokemon's type to just be that. You also gain a bonus to damage when using attacks of that type, and this stacks with the same type attack bonus, which still references your original typings instead of just the terrestrialization. So you really do get a big boost, even if you're already, for example, a fire type terrestrializing into another fire type. But the brilliance of terrestrializing is how flexible it is. Maybe you just want to hit really hard. You can do that by just stacking your stab bonus with the Terra bonus on top if it's the same thing. Maybe you want to shore up a weakness for that Pokemon. For example, maybe you have a water Pokemon and you're concerned about fighting against electric types. Well, you can terrestrialize them to be ground, making them immune to electric attacks. This is the greatest gimmick of any Pokemon game, and is what makes Scarlet and Violet the best combat of the franchise. This flexibility of how you build your team is amazing, and adds entire layers at every level of play, from story to casual multiplayer all the way up to the very top of competitive, where you can surprise your opponent with an off-meta Terra type that could turn the tide of the whole battle. It also unlocks tons of different strategies. This is the first time in my entire life that I even tried to get into actual multiplayer battling. I built a team around Doxman, which you'll learn just how much I like that Pokemon if you watch the companion video. The team uses Torkoal for its drought ability to start the game with Sunny Day, and then it uses Lava Plume, a hard-hitting fire attack that hits every Pokemon on the field. So the other Pokemon I start with is Doxman, which is a bred dog, and has the ability Well-Baked Body, which makes the fire attacks harden its crust, raising defense instead of dealing damage. So you're raising the defense of your ally and hurting both of your enemies. From there, I use other defensive abilities to protect Doxman while I keep doing this to boost the defense a whole ton, and then just let it rip. Terrestrializing into Fighting type on Doxman and attacking with Body Press, which uses defense instead of attack to determine the damage, which is now sky high. Add on the bonus damage from matching with the Terra type, and my Doxman does massive damage to a ton of different kinds of Pokemon, especially Steel types that maybe they've brought out to counter Doxman's original Fairy typing. The rest of the team is a backup plan to still play off of the sunny weather or flexible spots based on what my opponent might use, and types that counter the team and Terra types cater to that as well. Flipping Doxman, a fairy Pokemon, to fighting to not only counter its natural counters but also give a big damage boost, propping up an entire strategy, is just one reason I love terrestrialization, and those reasons are everywhere you look. Once you're ready to go out into the world, the game does open up a ton. This is an open world game, and the school does a sort of independent study thing called the treasure hunt, which basically allows students to roam the region on their own in order to learn more about Pokemon and their own interests. This ties back to Paldea's focus on the arts and self-expression that I love so much, and that's reflected in some of the things you can get up to. In order to help facilitate this vast expanse of areas, you can mount up on your cover Pokemon and move way faster with it. While you're free to roam wherever, as the game does advertise it as being open world, that's a little misleading. The game doesn't really scale to your levels or anything, so while you can go anywhere, you probably should not. This was admittedly a big disappointment to me, but on this topic of running around, the biggest disappointment for me about the game was the cooperative multiplayer that they introduced and promoted a whole lot with the marketing leading up to its release. In anticipation of this, my wife and I decided that this would be the time to buy a second Switch so we can play with each other, only to learn that while we can run around with each other in real time, we're really just both playing the game separately, but can just see what the other one is doing, which is admittedly kind of fun to see, but not really what we were hoping for. This does at least make for a really easy time of grinding Terra raids, because you're already in a party and don't need to dance through menus, so it's at least good for that. Terra raids are an evolution of what they introduced in Sword and Shield, allowing for 4 trainers to fight a big boss all at the same time, and they're definitely better this time around. There's a lot of reasons to do Terra raids, from the special reward items you get from them, to the interesting Pokemon themselves. Each raid has a type, and you can figure out which Pokemon it will be from a who's that Pokemon sort of silhouette. Importantly, the type does not always match that of the Pokemon naturally. Remember off-typing my Darkspun? There's a way you can change what a Pokemon's Terra type is by collecting shards from raids and then turning them in somewhere to manually change it, but sometimes you just get lucky by getting the Pokemon you want from the raid itself having the Terra type you're looking for, saving yourself a ton of grinding. More importantly, however, it makes it so you need to actually think about every raid you're doing. Just because something is a grass raid doesn't guarantee a super leveled up Charizard will always be the right choice. Maybe it's a Stonjourner terastallized to grass, but it still knows all of its rock moves, which Charizard has double weakness to. Again, just another amazing thing about this mechanic that I absolutely adore. But enough about all of that. There's a story here, and it's certainly something. Scarlet and Violet has my favorite combat in the series, and I've certainly got some opinions about the Pokemon, including my favorite Pokemon ever made being introduced via this game. So why is it not my highest ranked Pokemon game? Well, some others do certainly gain some more nostalgia points, but that's a relatively small part of it, really. The biggest issue I have with the game is the lack of direction in the story. There are actually 4 stories you're actually playing simultaneously, with very marginal overlap, and only 2 of them are actually good. If the game scaled to where you were at, this would be just great and amazing. You could tackle it in whatever order you wanted, and if you really want to focus on one, you could, but instead, there's just an intended order that feels punishing or boring if you do it wrong. That being said, there are some great moments, and the first storyline is your path to become champion, pushed on by Nimona, of course. She wants to battle you and for you to be her rival, and she needs that. She's a pretty good rival in that if I was actually trying to excel at Pokemon battling, she'd be a great help. She's a terrible rival in that she's not interesting, other than wanting to battle everyone all the time, which is kind of funny, but overstays its welcome as her only defining character trait. You do the gyms, and then beat the Elite Four, and then the champion, and then you're done and get a fun big last battle with Nimona. That's some good fighting. It's fun, but certainly not revolutionary. There are some interesting puzzles, at least because you have to do a little side story thing for every gym to help the town or the gym leader or something, depending on the place. It's just another thing that emphasizes the vibrance of life in the Paldean region, and I'm so happy it's there. I love the focus on the parts of life in Pokemon that aren't just battling, and this game does it better than most of them. I do want to touch on one particular gym leader, though, who might be my new favorite gym leader in the entire franchise. Not because of his Pokemon, not because of his trial, or anything remotely mechanically in the game. Larry is the normal gym leader because he's just an everyday office worker pulling like 80-hour work weeks and working himself to the bone, and he's kind of depressed all the time, and I just want to give him a big hug. But on top of all of that, he's also doing his gym leader duties and maintaining a separate spot on the Elite Four using flying Pokemon. I love Larry. He's great. The next storyline is dealing with Team Star. They're bullying students into joining their ranks, trying to encourage them to drop out of school and go do whatever it is that they do. I'm really not sure what they do. Outside of talking a lot of trash and harassing kids outside the school a bit, or hanging out at their bases, they don't seem to do much of anything. You go to these bases and challenge each boss, one by one, to get them to stand down and split up their little gang. Before doing so, however, you have to defeat a giant gauntlet of Pokemon by using the roaming battling system they introduced to the game. This is a fun change of pace, and I like it for this. That being said, I only like it so much, and I think they generally nailed doing just the right amount of it. Importantly, each boss has a final Pokemon that's always a Revavroom, which is literally just a sentient car engine, and they mounted them to giant, like Mad Max level trucks. They are awesome. This whole effort, though, is spearheaded by a hacker that calls you and sends you basically money in exchange for challenging the leaders and taking them down, despite the fact that they're not really doing anything. This might sound like I don't like the Team Star storyline, but on the contrary, it's an incredible character-driven story that slowly peels itself back as you take down the 4 leaders, and you get a whole bunch of flashback sequences regarding the founding of Team Star, and then after you do all of that, you have to take down the original founder and boss. But these kids are remarkable and filled with pain, just looking for a place to belong. Joining you for this ride is Clive, who is definitely not Director Clavel in disguise. How do you do, fellow kids? Penny is also involved in the story, largely running deliveries and gathering information. I'm not spoiling the ending to this story because it's absolutely worth playing, but man, I just want to give every one of these kids a great big hug and tell them that everything's going to be okay. The third storyline, however, is the best one. You follow Arven in his strange request to gather these mythical herbs that might not even exist because he wants to make amazing sandwiches. I cannot overstate how big of a deal sandwiches are to these people. You can have picnics, which is a way for you to play with your Pokemon, and also how you do breeding in this game, finding eggs in the picnic basket rather than dropping them off at a daycare. But more importantly, you can make sandwiches. These require a variety of different ingredients and give you bonuses that I've never looked up how long they actually last. I just kind of assume they last until I pick a new one, or maybe I close the game, or maybe they wear off and I never knew. But bonuses could improve experience gains by type, can improve the chance for some types to have items, and can even increase your chance of finding shiny Pokemon. These sandwiches have tons of uses, and building them can be kind of fun, if nothing else for the ridiculous cutscene that plays of you and your Pokemon chowing down. But yeah, sandwiches. Arven. Those mythical herbs are protected by enormous guardians called Titan Pokemon, which Arven recruits you to help fight. These are kind of like the Terra raids I talked about, except it's just you and Arven, and there's no off-type shenanigans you have to worry about. A flying one is gonna be the flying one. I'm not going to spoil the whole story here, but I'm going to spoil the important part. This is the only thing in a Pokemon game that has made me cry. And I mean, I cried. Tears just streaming down my face and everything, not just like my eyes getting a little wet, which is happening just now, starting to think about it. The first Titan you beat isn't that interesting, but you definitely get a sense that Arven isn't telling you everything. He gets the herbs, he makes the sandwiches, your cover Pokemon hops out of its Pokeball and demands a delicious sandwich. This actually causes it to heal a bit, giving you more abilities while running around, like you can scale cliff walls or you can even glide. There's a bunch of stuff. And completing this storyline is integral to eventually being able to battle with your cover Pokemon. But Arven asks you leave while he handles everything else, and we, the player, I'm not sure if the character technically sees this, see him say to someone off screen that it's safe to come out now, as if maybe someone's been watching. Arven is extremely shady at all times through these parts of the game, from your first interaction with him, to how he tries to ask you for help in a kind of secretive and out of the way, way, to clearly someone or something hiding the entire time you were with him. And this is on top of Team Star not really doing that much, right? As far as like villainy goes. So when you beat the second Titan, and Arven admits he hasn't been entirely honest about what he's been doing with these herbs and his motivations for collecting them, I fully expected some big reveal for him to be the actual antagonist to the game. I did not expect to grab onto my dog and ugly cry into his coat. Arven has been doing all of this work as a last-ditch effort to save the life of his Mabostiff, his partner Pokemon who nearly died protecting him. No amount of potions or Pokemon centers could heal this Mabostiff, and he had read that these herbs, which might not have actually existed, could heal anything. As if this wasn't touching enough, Arven's reaction when Mabostiff opened its eyes for the first time in months just absolutely destroyed me. Arven and his Mabostiff are not only the greatest story in Pokemon, but one of the greatest stories in gaming. Seriously, hats off to the writing team for this game, which managed to actually fit a deeply compelling, touching, and human story into a Pokemon game. If only the rest of the game stood up to that, though. Again, I still do really like the Team Star story. Once you complete those 3 storylines, the 4th opens up. It has some overlap in the others as you go, especially with Arven. One of his parents, depending on which version of the game you're playing, could be his mom or his dad, is one of the preeminent Pokemon professors in Paldea, and is away, studying deep within Area Zero, the crater in the center of the region. You've been instructed you can't go in there because of how dangerous it is. Well, there's a distress signal from the professor, and you and your friends head down there anyways. Area Zero is massive, and running around with the friends your characters made along the way is actually pretty great. Some of the areas have long stretches before you can heal again, and it's a surprising challenge in what was otherwise pretty smooth sailing for me. I'm not spoiling the specifics, but this ties together some questions about how terrestrialization works, some loose ends for Arven, your cover Pokemon, and importantly, what in the world are Paradox Pokemon? I'm not going to get into every detail about that here, but there are Pokemon you find that are clearly an alternate form of something else, but it's not like a regional variant. For example, Iron Hands is a robotic-looking Hariyama, and Screamtail, which is such a great name, is a primal version of Jigglypuff. I hate Paradox Pokemon. Some of them are alright, and if you really want my full thoughts on them all, check out the ranking video, but this is the laziest gimmick Game Freak has ever done. They're from the future if you're playing Violet, and the past if you're playing Scarlet. And after you figure that out, very little interesting things happen with the story. That being said, I'm hopeful that this is where the DLC fixes things, because I've actually managed to avoid any and all story spoilers from that, which is remarkable, and I know just by saying that I've invited them all. So what do you do after you beat the story? There's some battling tournaments, there's some really fun fallout from the different subplots that give you replayable things, and of course, there's always Pokedex completion and shiny hunting to do, which is a little nicer this time around with the sandwiches. But mostly, get ready to do a ton of Terra raids. You can get some really difficult ones after you beat the game, and it'll take a lot of thorough planning to take them on. This can be solo, using computer fake friends, I guess, or online with actual people. Finding raids online can be a great way to consistently find the most difficult ones to push yourself, but importantly, there's also event raids that happen with an extra challenge for people every once in a while, and I really enjoy pushing through those. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has a lot of things that are my favorite things this franchise has literally ever done, but is also plagued by poor pacing, disjointed storytelling, and some of the laziest character designs that I have ever seen from the franchise, despite also having some of the series' greatest ideas. Despite these flaws, I think the game really holds up and is excellent. There's so many things that are very memorable to me, and it's the first one I've ever actually tried to do competitive online battling, and that itself was a journey. They made it more accessible than any other game. It's really easy to get your EVs right and your IVs right, which are like hidden stats for your Pokemon. It's really easy to swap abilities, it's really easy to swap terrestrialization types, all of these things that historically I would have been very intimidated by and would have thought, I need to put 30 hours into making this team. Once you actually have stuff set up to do it, it goes pretty quick and you can experiment and try things without feeling like you've wasted a bunch of time if it doesn't work. So the game is in some ways like the most Pokemon I might ever play if I keep playing online. Obviously I haven't been this year because daily videos, but I expect to play a lot more. I'm definitely doing the DLC next year, and I'm looking forward to it. But you can join me tomorrow for my 50th favorite game as I return someone's bomb.